Thank you for joining us today at Naturally Scott. I'm Scott Harris, and I'll be your host on this journey as we discuss birds, wildlife, parks, nature, and the environment. At least once a week, I'll bring you the very best of America's spectacular world of nature, from birds to mammals to reptiles and amphibians, from soaring mountains to endless plains, from rugged coastlines to rivers and streams. Every episode will feature an expert guest, a ranger, a researcher, a birder, an author, a biologist, or an adventurer, someone who has seen what we want to see and been where we want to go. This isn't just another nature show. It's a safari for your eyes and ears. Now let's get started on today's adventure. And as always, stay curious. Welcome to Naturally Scott, and I'm Scott Harris. I'm excited that you're going to be here today. My guest is Dr. Scott Edwards, and I'm going to tell you a bit about Scott. We're going to cover some birding stuff, and we're going to cover some natural history museum stuff, and then some life things that Scott has done, including an amazing bike ride and an upcoming book that I'm going to let him tell you about. And Scott, as I've mentioned with a couple of my other guests, is also a guest in Why We Love Birds, the book that'll be coming out soon, where I get to interview 52 prominent, high-profile, interesting, fascinating, quirky birders. And Scott is all of those, as a matter of fact. I want to read to you because I couldn't possibly memorize it, but this is from the Harvard website, and this is their description of Scott, or the opening paragraph. Dr. Scott V. Edwards moved to Harvard University in late 2003 as a professor of Organismic. Is that right?
Organismic, yep.
Organismic and evolutionary biology, and curator of ornithology in the Museum of Comparative Zoology, where he continues efforts to unite genomics and natural history and involve students at all levels. I consider myself a reasonably smart person, but I struggle with Scott's introduction. And as we learned, I can't even pronounce all of the things that he has in his title. But having talked to Scott before, he is a fascinating guy. We're going to talk to him about the Natural History Museum there at Harvard and the things that you're doing. And we're going to talk about the ethical dilemmas related to that, because I think that'll be fascinating. But before we do that, let's let our audience learn a little bit about you and a little bit of the background. And if memory serves, you grew up in New York?
That's right. Riverdale, New York, in the Bronx.
Okay, tell us about that. I think you told me like a 2-hour bus ride to Jamaica.
Yeah.
You had some interesting things when you got into birding.
I caught the birding bug when a neighbor took me bird watching. I was probably 9 or 10 years old. And, I don't even think that neighbor was particularly into birding that much. He just sort of suggested it. Anyway, I caught the bug and just birding around my house in Riverdale. My spark bird was what we called back then the yellow shafted flicker. Couldn't believe such a bizarrely plumaged bird was in my backyard. And yes, you're right, Scott. I got so passionate about it that I would, but of course, being less than a teenager and living far away from the really hot birding spots, I would take the A train about 2 hours to Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge.
And how old were you when you were doing that?
In New York back then in the 70s, we grew up fast. I was probably 10 or 11 or 12, taking public transportation by myself then was not unusual.
When I was a kid about the same age, we lived in Redondo Beach in Southern California, and my folks would let us walk to the beach, about 2 to 3 miles, I guess. And we'd be gone all day on a Saturday or a Sunday with, obviously no cell phones or anything. We were kids.
Yeah.
You and I are roughly the same age. So this was happening for me in the 60s. And if our parents did either of the things, let you go on a bus for 2 hours or let me walk 3 miles to the beach at age 9 or 10, they'd take us away from them.
Right.
I mean, things have changed, and I don't think in a good way.
Yeah.
But we become so fearful.
I agree. And honestly, New York has actually gotten a lot safer since that time. And I do worry just about kids growing independence. How do they just learn to navigate for themselves? I think my parents loved me like anyone else, but they were, for better or worse, more hands off. And I think it benefited me in the long run.
Oh, I think so too. I can remember my folks giving me $1 bill like at 8 in the morning and my bicycle and telling me to be home when the streetlights come on.
That's right. That's right.
And and that was it, man. You were gone 12, 13 hours. They had no idea
Exactly.
where you were or what you were doing. And parents now, they seem to panic if they haven't seen their kid in 8 minutes or gotten a text or a,
Yeah. Well,
you know, and
we've evolved in concert with the technology, right? I mean, now that we can stay in touch every second of the day, that's what we expect.
well, I don't know if it's an evolution. Well, I
That's
guess it's an evolution, but I don't know if it shows human growth. But we're
that's
going to
right.
talk about that because that's part of what attracted you to this job is a combination of high tech and natural history. And I
That's right.
and I do want to talk to you about it because most people with your education um, seem mostly attracted to field work, and you purposely chose another direction. We're not going to let that go, but I don't want to lose your childhood. So, coastal New Hampshire Christmas bird count. I think that has been a constant in your life for a long time.
Yes. Well, one of my high school biology teachers, a man named Rich Aronian, he was a marine biologist and just knew everything from seashells to invertebrates to birds. And he really encouraged my interest in ornithology. And I've been connecting with him over the past 10 or 15 years now at the coastal New Hampshire Christmas bird count in Seabrook. And it's one of these punishing Christmas counts. You know, it's freezing at 6 in the morning. Of course, we arrive at the Dunkin' Donuts and spend literally half an hour kind of meeting friends from all around New Hampshire. But I was kind of thinking, couldn't we still be in bed now? You know, but it's a great Christmas bird count, and it's been great to connect with my high school biology teacher that way.
Oh, that's fantastic. Hey, Scott, do me a favor. Can you center your camera just a little bit? We're losing the left side of your face. I don't, and we don't want
Okay.
to lose any
Well,
of
you
it.
know, so let me see here. Oh, how's
There you
that?
go.
Is that
Perfect.
better? Okay,
Now we
good,
now we have the full
good.
Scott Edwards
Okay,
experience.
okay.
That would be the name of your band, by the way, if you
That's right.
started one. It's the
That's right.
Scott
Falling on
Edwards experience.
Jimi Hendrix, right?
Now, Dad was a doctor,
Yes, that's right.
and you had mentioned that that was a path you were kind of sliding down, almost out of expectation. And I don't mean to pick on your parents about that, but it just was kind of
Well,
you
yeah,
were
I mean,
bright, and your dad was a doctor, and it just
you know,
seemed like the path at one point.
I think a lot of folks, including myself, a lot of students growing up, they don't know anything else to do besides become a doctor or a lawyer. I mean, okay, I was, I suppose, privileged in that way, in that my parents were professionals. But even within that expanded world, you just don't know that there are opportunities to study the environment, study different species, either working for the government or being an academic or whatever. And so I was kind of my dad's last hope for taking up the family practice. I was the only one who was sort of inclined towards science. And, you know, it took me probably until my junior year in college to realize that there were other paths that were more suited to my interests. So I'm just thankful that I listened to that inner voice. And, you know, I do worry about the legions of students who are passionate about one thing, and yet society and their family are telling them to do something else, and that's a tough situation.
That's a very tough situation,
Yeah,
especially because most of us aren't necessarily that strong at 17, 18, 19 years old.
that's right.
You know,
Yeah,
there's a huge difference between being intellectually sharp and being emotionally strong. And emotional strength, I mean, it comes from good parenting, it comes from inside, it comes from experience, but a lot of that comes from age. You know, you got to get kicked around a little bit
that's
and
right. That's
and
right.
toughen you up. Now, you mentioned that you explored different paths. You took a gap year, and I'm going to trigger some things for you: Smithsonian, Hawaii, Turn Island, Australia. These were some of the things you found on your new path. Is that correct?
That's right. That's
Share
right.
share that with us, please.
Yeah, you know, I had just take finished organic chemistry. Sadly, it was a very humiliating affair, and I just told my dad that I needed to take a year off.
I'm sorry. Let me interrupt you for a second. Organic chemistry has a reputation of being perhaps the toughest class that people can take, certainly at the undergraduate level. Is that
It's
true?
it's still, sadly, it's still true, and I worry about it because we have good evidence that negative experiences like that can turn people away from science, and I'm still not sure why it's that way on basically every student's transcript that I've ever seen.
So you think organic chemistry has taken a lot of scientists and turned them into accountants?
Absolutely. Absolutely, it has. It's true.
You
In
don't
my
think debits and credits have sent people running toward organic chemistry?
in my case, I I guess I knew enough to know that there were other kinds of science out there, and that if I failed in one particular skill set of science, I might be successful in another. But yeah, I ended up taking a gap year. I had some relatives in DC. I was writing letters like furiously, and I actually got a response from a very wonderful curator at the Smithsonian named George Watson. And I went down and I volunteered with him during the day and worked at the Georgetown Bakery by night, but just kind of got a glimpse of what it meant to be a museum curator, what it meant to study ornithology. It was a very exciting time. The new edition of the National Geographic Field Guide to North American Birds was just coming out, and George was a consultant on that. And so there was a lot of buzz and excitement. And that took me for about 6 months, after which I returned to my birthplace, Hawaii. I wanted to see what that looked like from an older perspective. I only lived there for a year as I was growing up. And that was just extraordinary. I was taken under the wing by a national park ranger. I saw things during those few months that I think many scientists even haven't seen. Helicoptering into the Kipahulu Valley and the backside of Maui, looking at endangered parrotbills and other species. And back on the Big Island, I would be helping with eradication of pigs and looking at the ecology of the nene, the Hawaiian goose. And so it was just a hugely expansive time, the time of discovery, and realizing that there was so much exciting field work to be done, and or birds to explore. And so I returned from that year completely energized, much more focused, and I had very detailed instructions from a colleague, a professor I met at Berkeley, who said, "There's a new professor at Harvard named Rodney Honeycutt. You got to go study with him." And that's what started me on my track for research. So,
Oh, that's fantastic. Now, tell us about Turn Island.
Turn Island. Well, Turn Island is a extraordinary island. It's sort of halfway between Kauai, the northernmost of the main Hawaiian islands, and Midway Island, with the site of the famous World War II battle. And it is a core part of the Northwest Hawaiian Islands National Wildlife Refuge. It's been renamed now, with appropriately with a Hawaiian name. But I was about to head back to the mainland, literally my ticket in hand, ready to go to the airport, and I saw a notice for a need for volunteers to help study seabirds on Turn Island. And it was great in those days. I just literally ripped up my ticket and said I wanted to do this. And I got in touch, a colleague there named Bruce Eilerts. He was my host out there. He showed me the ropes. There were only 5 of us on this island that was, several tens of acres long and about 6 feet maximum elevation above sea level. It was an extraordinary experience being on this very isolated island, surrounded by thousands of seabirds of all sizes and shapes, albatrosses to boobies to petrels and tropic birds. And it was just a celebration of life and diversity. And that started me on a lifelong and career-long interest in seabirds, particularly albatrosses.
Which are a favorite of yours. So black-footed albatross, I believe, is a
That's
big
right.
deal to you,
I
right?
love they're great birds. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right. So, and I think in your travels, as you were finding yourself and finding ornithology and explaining to Dad why you weren't going to be a doctor, Australia was included in those travels. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. I think being from Hawaii and having visited there again, I was very interested in the whole Pacific region. And I also knew by the time I graduated from college that New Guinea was in many ways the mecca for ornithology in terms of looking at birds of paradise and just the romance of exploration. And honestly, I grew up reading National Geographic, reading about these explorers, and that's exactly what I wanted to do. And I was able to connect with a researcher then at UC San Diego in California who was conducting a ecological study of birds of paradise. And it was just a fabulous experience. We were radio tracking them through the forest. There are about 10 or 12 species on this mountain in eastern, in under the eastern provinces on New Guinea Island. And during that time, I was there for about 4 months. I was actually applying for permits to begin my work, which would eventually become my dissertation on biogeography of Australian birds, specifically Australian babblers. And there were 4 species in Australia and one in the lowlands of New Guinea. And so it all kind of fell together. Back then, getting permits was not difficult. And I was actually being enrolled as a first year graduate student at UC Berkeley in California. I was able to sort of seamlessly transition from working on birds of paradise to beginning my own research, which was very exciting.
That's fantastic. And then you got a gig, University of Washington,
That's right. Yep.
a 9-year gig, if memory serves.
That's right. Yep. I finished my PhD at Berkeley in about 1992. I did a 2-year postdoc at the University of Florida, working on understanding how birds fight disease. And then I transitioned to my first job. Finally, academics have this sort of arrested development. It's like, when are you going to get a real job? And so by 1995, I had a real job in Seattle. I was a professor in the biology department and then a curator at the Burke Museum there. And that was for 9 years. It was fabulous. It's a world-class university, just great facilities. And I've still got a lot of great colleagues and friends there.
But you were drawn away and Harvard called. And as you told me, your job was to make dead birds exciting, which is a phrase I had not heard before. So you're going to get credit or blame, however you want to look at it. And you also had told me, and I want you to talk about both of these things, if you would. You also said that the attraction of going back and working in the natural history area, working to make dead birds exciting, was the combination of natural history and high tech. And that maybe it was time to get out of the field after a couple of decades in the field and do some inside stuff. Do I have that right?
Well, I think it's a little bit, yeah, it was a little bit different from that. I think, hopefully, as an ornithologist, hopefully you appreciate that I certainly celebrate live birds more than I would dead birds. I think there's a lot we can learn from the insides of birds, their DNA, their chromosomes, their brains, that will complement what we know about their outsides, their relationship with the environment, their natural history, their interactions with other individuals and species. And so, and I've always been fascinated with museums. I think there's, most bird watchers, I think, would agree that museums, natural history museums are fascinating, but of course you have to sort of think about when the rubber meets the road. We're looking at a bunch of dead birds in these exhibits and they bring us interest, joy, etc. How did they get there? Well, at some point someone had to sacrifice them and put them up as specimens. And this is, I think, when we think about the sort of the on the ground issues around museums, that's I think where there's some interesting discussions to be had. I think we have a lot to learn from many different aspects of ornithology, and I think that some kinds of science require us to sacrifice birds. I know this is deeply problematic for a lot of people, a lot of bird watchers. But many of our staunchest champions of conservation and celebration of birds and life have in fact been collectors. So for example, people like, of course, Teddy Roosevelt, he's the icon, but think about John Fitzpatrick, who was recently director of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. You couldn't imagine a institution more dedicated to conserving and celebrating bird diversity. Well, you talk to him, I hope you have him on your series. He's a staunch believer in the importance of, responsible collecting of birds as a window into their biology and their science. And I think we have to try to remove ourselves a bit from the emotional side of it. And we also have to have a clear eye about what we are losing, in fact, when we sacrifice a bird. Of course, we don't sacrifice endangered species. We have to get permission from lots of different federal and state agencies for all this work. Um, and so, often people, I think, conflate sacrificing individuals for compromising the health of the species. And I think those are probably two different things.
Isn't
But I think,
there an argument that it's exactly the opposite? That sacrificing a handful of individuals benefits the species rather than
well, sure, if you want to think of it that way. I think there's a
I
lot
do,
of,
because it makes it easier to think about.
well, there's a honestly, if you think about the number of individual birds that are sacrificed each day at the hands of feral cats on the bumpers of cars, migrating and hitting glass windows, the number of individuals that scientists and museum curators take is paltry in comparison to these monumental sources of bird mortalities. From a numbers perspective, it's not even worth talking about. So I think, if you want to make a big moral issue about it, that's fine. But I think I think people are misdirecting their concerns when they point the finger at museum scientists. They should be worried about the orders of magnitude more death and destruction going on as a result of feral cats and other.
Well, I would say,
Yeah.
setting aside the issue of habitat loss,
Mm,
feral cats and glass are the two
mm.
major killers of our birds.
Exactly. And make no mistake, scientists benefit from those deaths as well. We at least make use of those birds that have been succumbed to those kinds of hazards. We put them in our collections. We take their tissues. We can look at their DNA. We can look at their isotopes. So it's unlike the millions of birds that are just crushed on highways that we just never can even make use of in their deaths. So it's
Yeah,
kind of
I was first introduced to that back in about 73 or 74. I was in high school and I got invited to go to Humboldt State University to study marine biology for a summer, which, for a 16-year-old kid was, man, that was a remarkable thing.
it's
But the
great.
cafeteria had these massive 4-story glass walls, and they were losing a couple dozen birds a day.
Yeah.
And, this was before people were even thinking to put stickers up, much less, the new stuff we have. And I can remember that there were people from the ornithology department out there gathering these birds. I would have thought that it was a janitor's job.
Yeah,
And
right.
to your point about being close to something but still not being aware that it's there, I considered myself a little baby scientist, right? I was one of 60 that was selected to study marine biology for the summer. And even then it was like, you're not picking these up to incinerate them or
That's
toss
right.
them or feed them to a cat or whatever you're going to do with them. The science is going to benefit from this. Now,
That's right.
I wasn't happy to see the birds crash against the windows, but to
Right.
your point, if they're going to crash anyway, and maybe today they don't have to,
Yeah.
technology and windows and glass and
Yeah.
whatnot has changed. But natural history museums, the first one I believe was 1683 in Oxford, in England, was the very first natural history museum. And even then it was controversial. And you mentioned Teddy Roosevelt and Audubon. And of course, Audubon's going through a whole
Right. Right.
bunch of
Right.
stuff now, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
chapters are changing names.
That's
And,
right. That's right.
and once again, we're viewing historical figures through today's kaleidoscope, and we don't always come out great.
That's right. That's right.
But that being said, he certainly did kill an awful lot of birds, but look at what we gained. Look at what happened. Now, I just finished, do you know David Gessner?
Yes, I do actually.
Okay, so David wrote a
He
couple
was
of
actually a classmate of mine at Harvard,
You
turns
gotta be
out.
kidding
No,
me.
you gotta interview him for your,
Oh, I have. He's
podcast.
in the book, and he's gonna
Oh,
do one
good.
of the
Oh, good.
podcasts.
Oh, that's so funny.
But in addition to the Osprey books, which is how I was introduced to him, he wrote a book called Leave It As It Is,
Hmm.
about Teddy Roosevelt. And as you read that book by David, and this is not the first podcast where I mentioned that, he is tortured as he looks back at Teddy
Mm.
Roosevelt. I mean, obviously, you can't help but be thrilled that we have tens of millions of acres of land, or hundreds of millions of acres of land, that we might not have otherwise had if it wasn't for Teddy Roosevelt. But he was a borderline indiscriminate hunter. It wasn't always for science. I mean, granted, he started his own natural history museum when he was 8 or 9 years old,
Right.
upstairs in his home, and he certainly was a naturalist and a lover of the environment and all of those things. but it was a different time. And yet, as David points out, it wasn't a different time for everybody. One of his contemporaries was John Muir. They spent time together, obviously, in
Right. That's
Yosemite
right.
and other places. And John
That's
Muir
right.
was on the other end of that. So
Yes, that's
it
right.
can't be fully excused by, golly gee, everybody was doing it, we didn't know.
Right.
If you spent 3 days alone with John Muir in Yosemite, the issue of hunting animals was definitely discussed. May not have been shared
Absolutely.
with the press, but it
And
was
I think,
certainly
yeah,
discussed. And
yeah,
I kind of think of natural history museums a little bit like zoos. I struggle a little bit. I don't ever want to see an animal, a lion shot down or a bird shot out of a tree. And I'm not a big fan of seeing animals in cages. On the other hand, that may be the result of the fact I've been fortunate enough to travel around the world to see animals.
yeah,
Not everybody gets to do that.
that's right.
If you don't have the time or the physical ability or the money or whatever, I don't know that it's right to try to deprive somebody from never seeing an elephant or
Yeah,
never seeing a tiger.
yeah.
And,
It's a
and I
tough
think it's the
call.
same thing with the natural history museums.
Right.
If I'm going to the fields or, going somewhere where they have these, first of all, who knows how many young people have their curiosity and your imagination ignited.
That's
I mean,
right.
yours was, well, you
That's right.
call it a yellow shafted, it's now a northern flicker. But
Yeah.
generally, people that go on and do things like that, there was an ignition point.
Yes.
And for you, it was your backyard, but for
Well, and it was also the American Museum of Natural History where I would
that's right.
be every
And you
week.
walk
So
through those
yeah,
halls and you look
yeah,
and you say, my
yeah,
God, these exist in
yeah, yeah,
nature.
yeah,
This
yeah,
is available for me to see somehow, somewhere, someday.
yeah.
And suddenly an 8, 9, 10-year-old young man or young woman is thinking about a path that they might not otherwise have thought of. And so
I
I'm
think,
with you. I
yeah,
think there's controversy, and I think a
yeah,
little bit of it is understandable. I think people
yeah,
go way overboard. But I
yeah,
think if we do a net cost,
mm,
benefit analysis, and
yeah,
to your point, we're taking 1/10 of 1% of what feral cats are taking,
right.
maybe we're not the ones that are screwing things up here.
That's right. I think, there have been horrible incidents where museum curators have been vilified when the public realized that they were sacrificing individuals. I think of that incident with the kingfisher and the curator from the American Museum. Yeah, we need to everyone needs to do their research and needs to put all these activities in perspective. And I think that there are a lot of weird skeletons in the closet in many museums, probably more so in like anthropology museums than in natural history museums, but still there's a lot of practices that have gone on since the 19th century, which we do need to change. And the truth is, Scott, there's very different kinds of professional ornithologists out there in the museum space. Some basically grew up hunting and frankly, in my view, celebrate hunting in a way that I would never endorse. Whereas others, such as myself, we sort of come from an urban background. We've never hunted in our lives. And yet we see value in, responsible collecting. And so, yeah, there's all different directions that one can come at this from. And I think that I've become comfortable with getting the permits, not being excessive, and certainly not celebrating the death of anything. I think that for us, the balance of learning and science and education outweighs the lives that we might sacrifice. And this shift that you mentioned in Teddy Roosevelt from sort of ardent hunter to sort of having second thoughts. We see that in a lot of different people. I think about William Brewster, who was basically a curator at the Museum of Comparative Zoology where I work. And he gave his collection of 40,000 birds to the museum. And, he as well, you can see in his letters and stuff, transitioned from ardent collector to sort of pacifist, basically to the point where he just wouldn't collect any. Of course, he was involved with the founding of the Massachusetts Audubon Society and also the American Ornithological Society, formerly the AOU, American Ornithologist Union. So, and I think honestly, throughout my career, I've already felt that hesitation. Like, do I really want to be doing this? And, it's just sort of, everyone evolves, everyone changes. And I think that when when we see the kinds of science that can come both from destructive sampling and from non-destructive sampling, I think there's so much cool stuff out there. It's just a privilege that we can do any science at all, frankly. Uh,
Well, and let's talk about that because for the audience out there today, if you're curious about this, there's no shortage of literature and books and things that you can study with regards to the controversies of natural history museums and the collection of samples. But Scott, let's talk about the good work that you're doing. So we've talked about the justification. You've mentioned, we get results in science. What are those? What are the things you're working on now? How is the scientific community stronger and better because of the natural history work that you're doing at Harvard and other universities around the country and museums that are doing the same thing? What are we gaining?
Well, I think a lot of ornithology today and a lot of ecology is essentially focused on conservation. And I think this is hugely important. We need to understand how our world of biodiversity is basically falling apart. I have, for better or worse, tended to focus on curiosity science. Why do birds have wing stripes? That sort of thing, wing bars. And, it's funny because, and of course, the funding is what regulates all of our activities. I think it's becoming increasingly challenging in the States, but also in other countries to get funding to study anything other than what's not perfectly aligned with human health and human well-being. That's a really slippery slope. I mean, honestly, intellectually, I put myself more in communion with sort of artists and historians. It's all about learning about our world and generating fascination from that. So, I mean, some of the recent work we've done, which I think is fun, is we've probed into the genetic reasons why birds become flightless. Think about ostriches and emus or the extinct moas of New Zealand. What were the genetic switches that caused these things to become flightless? It wasn't what we expected. And it's a really fascinating story of multiple losses of flight. Scientists used to think that the Paleognathus birds, meaning the ostriches and emus and cassowaries and kiwis, were all descended from a flightless ancestor. It turns out instead that they all lost flight independently, which sets up a really interesting set of kind of natural experiments. You've got different species losing flight in their own way multiple times, and that allowed us to see whether these mechanisms of losing flight were the same or different. And this was a project involving some of the latest genetic tools and computational tools. In some ways, a question like that is actually easier to answer than a question, why did these birds lose flight? Think about kiwis and moas in New Zealand. They had this extinct harse eagle, which is no longer with us, but which was presumably a top predator then. Otherwise, you're looking at an island pretty much devoid of mammalian predators. And so one of the leading hypotheses for why birds lost flight is because lack of predators allowed them to essentially conserve energy and not have to worry about flying anymore.
Excuse me, I don't mean this to be a semantical debate, but they didn't really so much lose flight as they abandoned it, right?
That's a
It
good
wasn't
question.
taken away from them.
Well, that's a really good question, Scott. I think we actually don't know whether flight was lost in sort of an active process of natural selection, meaning were individuals that didn't fly somehow able to lead more offspring and grow their populations, their lineages better than individuals that still could fly. That's the process of natural selection in a nutshell. That's different from, did the genes and structures that maintain flight simply degenerate because of lack of use? That's a different mechanism, one that Darwin also thought about, but it's not so much an active process as a sort of a passive one. And so those are really tough questions, and we don't actually know the answers. And honestly, they're much more difficult answers than I would say the proximate mechanisms, which genes may have been involved.
And with birds, more than many other animals, and even more with smaller birds than the larger birds that you're discussing. But with birds, energy balance is everything, right?
That's
I mean,
right.
for some raptors, they can go a couple, 4 days, but if you're a small songbird and you go 4 days without eating, you're dead. And
Exactly.
so it may very well be, to your point, that I'm not willing to expend any energy to maintain wings when I don't fly.
That's right, exactly, and the truth is,
and they be
things like moas and emus have basically become big cows with feathers, right? Their bones become much less hollow, they're solid, they're focused more on walking and running than they are on flying, and, it's a fascinating set of transformations.
My wife and I were down in Australia, not in Australia, you were in Australia. We were in Africa a few months ago, and so got to see my first wild ostriches.
Oh, neat. That's
And, well, I'll tell you what, that's an imposing animal.
This is very
That is
fun.
I mean, I get lions and I get tigers and, hippos and rhinos. I get it. But when you're standing close to an ostrich, it's kind of a holy crap.
It is. It
I
is.
mean,
Yeah,
I I get Jurassic Park is scary and, a 15-foot raptor would be frightening for a human, but an ostrich is real life right there in front of you, frightening.
it
To your
really
point, they
is.
are big and
They're big.
strong and
Exactly.
fast,
Yeah.
and they are
No.
not passive little creatures.
No, no, no.
We got charged twice
Did you?
by
Wow.
ostriches. Now, we
Wow.
also on that trip got charged by elephants twice.
Wow.
Either one of them, I should have been wearing adult diapers, and I will on my next trip down. But I don't know that the ostrich charging was much less frightening,
That's
than
right.
the elephant.
No, it's there, and of course, you've probably heard stories about people being gorged by the claws of cassowaries in the
Yes.
rainforest there. So it's
And we
about as
got to see
close as thing.
secretary birds,
Yeah,
which, I
yeah,
know they can fly, but
yeah.
they're predominantly ground birds,
That's
and
right, that's right.
they're a nasty little raptor. I mean,
Oh, man, no, well,
if
there's
if
we tend to sort of romanticize birds and their beautiful grace and stuff, but there are some nasty species out there,
yes.
you
Well,
know?
and, to your point about changing, now I have not looked this up, so this has not been validated. By the time our podcast airs, the one I'm about to mention will have aired just a few days before. But a gentleman named Kian Almered, and Kian is a marketing executive at Disney who has taken a fascinating interest in Disney birds. He became a COVID birder, so he's a 5 or 6 year birder, but he's a marketing expert and he works for Disney. So he's just fascinated by the birds that are in the movies and studying these, and that's what we discussed. But he did mention in the call, and I've not had time to research it, that researchers have shown that hummingbirds have evolved just in the last 100 to 200 years in Southern California to get a much longer bill and tongue
Hmm,
to reach into flowers that are changing. And I haven't looked it up, so this could be
yeah.
embarrassing for me to say this, but does evolution have an opportunity to move that quickly?
Yeah,
If we
that's a gr
stipulate for a moment that he's correct,
yeah, sure, I
and
mean,
he
I
got that, by the way, he read about it from Natural History Museum. They had
Mhm,
specimens dating back.
mhm,
It might have been the 18th century or it might have been the 1800s, but either way,
mm.
that's a blip in evolution, right?
That's right, that's right. I mean, it all depends how fine a lens we put on something. We know from studies of Darwin's finches and other species where folks like Peter and Rosemary Grant have tracked the changes of beak size when there's a drought and seeds get smaller versus larger. Evolution can happen very, very quickly. We're not talking about eons and millions of years. And that's an important thing, I think, for the public to appreciate. I think what we define as evolution is not necessarily a profound, shift from walking on all fours to, standing upright in the case of humans. It can be subtle changes, like changes of beak size. And so I think 150 years is entirely possible. I think, honestly, the challenge for scientists is to demonstrate it convincingly. There's a lot of variation out there that could be due to the environment. It's not necessarily encoded in genes. And evolutionary biologists tend to get excited about changes in genes and how they drive changes in the size and shape and behavior of organisms. And so I think, but 150 years is entirely possible. It just depends how closely we look, honestly.
Well, and I think, if we look now, setting aside the political part of this, climate change itself is undeniable. And the impact it's having, aside from the impact it's having on us as human beings, if we look at the animals that it's impacting, isn't this possible that this could be a time of tremendously accelerated change? Because we're going to lose species as a result of this, whether it's a megafauna like polar bears or any number of bird species where the climate change is triggering the migration too soon or too late and they arrive before or after the insects or whatnot.
That's right.
But aren't we going to aren't we going to look back at this one day? Won't the guy 7 generations down from your job look back at this time and say, "My God, look at what we did then, and then look at where we are now."
That's right.
And isn't
That's right.
that one of the values of the work that you're doing,
Well, I'd
is
like to think
accurately charting what's happening?
I absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. I think this is a time of unprecedented change. You're absolutely right. We're going to lose stuff, and it's a sad. Yeah, again, not to get political, but the evidence is overwhelming. And I will also say that it is a time where we need to continue to responsibly collect snapshots of our environment, whether it's through photographs or whether it's through specimens. The primary data that we have on how the world is changing comes from specimens. And I think climate change, there's lots of great examples out there where our planet is changing, and documenting those, I think, is super important. And it's a major, I would say, goal, part of the mission of you know bio collections around the world now.
Well, and that's one of the things I wanted to ask you before we move on to your bike trip, because I found that fascinating. But we've talked a lot actually about natural history museums historically and some of the controversy tied to that. Where is it going forward, Scott? What are you working on now, you and your colleagues and your peers, that we're going to be seeing the results of, other than what we just talked about, which is the dramatic impact of climate change? But what else do you look at? What else are we doing where, if we were so inclined to read the white paper or attend one of the conferences, what would we be learning?
Yeah, I think, again, like I said, I my excitement about science comes from the sheer wonder of stuff we see out there. I'm less motivated by the urgency of the impending catastrophes. I know this is important, but honestly, I do believe there's a direct line between engendering discovery and then engendering fascination and then inspiring respect to care for the planet. And so, in one of our recent studies, we've used some really exciting new techniques to understand what it means to be highly inbred versus to have a lot of individuals in your species. And we've done a very high tech comparison of the island scrub jay, which of course is this species of Aphelocoma jay that's found only on Santa Cruz Island in California, versus the western or Woodhouse's scrub jay, which of course is much more abundant. And we've been looking at a particular type of variation that we call structural variation. It's not that complicated. It's basically, instead of single DNA letters changing A's to G's to T's to C's, we're looking at big chunks of DNA, like big hundreds of thousands of base pairs, how they move around. What we're learning, one, is that bird chromosomes are much more dynamic than we thought. There's constantly things shifting around. Other thing we've learned is that this island bird, we already knew it had very little genetic variation. We're learning that it's actually accumulating variants that are bad for it. And this is entirely expected for a species that has small numbers and is undergoing inbreeding. A lot of these so-called structural variants turn out to be not so good for you. On average, they're slightly bad for you. They lower your fitness, fewer offspring, but they tend to accumulate in species that don't have many options in terms of who they're going to mate with.
And there aren't a lot of species that have fewer options than the island scrub jay.
I'm delighted to say that that's my latest life bird.
Wow.
I was just on Santa Cruz Island last Friday, and we got great looks at it. It's a fascinating species.
Scott, congratulations. Did you
Thank
go out with
you.
Island Packers?
I did. I went out with Island Packers.
So years ago, when I was a much younger man, I was on the board of the Friends of Channel Islands National Park.
Nice. Okay.
And I studied independently. I studied with a gentleman who has since passed named Bill Brisby, who was brilliant. He started the EATM program, the Exotic Animal Training Management program at Moore Park College, and was a marine biologist, and that's who I studied under. So I was looking at the island scrub jay back in the early 70s and was just back there a few months ago. I want to say April. I went out to look.
Nice.
And so we landed on the same pier. right?
Wow.
You
Yeah,
walk up
yeah,
that long
yeah,
pier and
yeah.
you're looking at an island that is exotic and
Oh, I
beautiful
know,
as anywhere
exactly.
you've
It's
been.
like being Darwin, really.
It feels. Did you get to see any island foxes?
Yes, we saw a couple island
Are those
foxes. Yeah,
spectacular?
they're crazy. It's
They're
crazy.
smaller than a
Absolutely
house
crazy.
cat.
I know, it's crazy. It's crazy.
And
Yeah,
you get to see the old buildings that are there and the
exactly,
beautiful, you
exactly.
got the picnic tables right on the beach. And
Yeah. No,
I'm
I would really love to spend a few days out there. Had you been is this you returning after not having been there for a long time, or?
I had not been there in 5 years.
Okay. Yeah.
I had
Yeah.
not been there in 5 years.
Yeah.
But I will tell you that Santa Cruz Island is, if you had told me it was 1974, I wouldn't have been surprised.
Yeah. That's so cool.
It has not changed. Now, let
That's
me ask
great.
you, since you started to study these things, from the tip of Santa Cruz Island, it's only 3 miles to Anacapa Island.
That's right.
Why
That's right.
hasn't the island scrub jay migrated to Anacapa Island?
Scott, that's one frustrating thing about evolutionary biology. It's like so many things we just can't verify and we've got to just speculate. I mean, I was thinking about that a lot. It's like first of all, how the heck did they get out to Santa Cruz Island in the first place? Scrub jays, they're not long distance flyers.
The shortest route to Santa Cruz, I think, is either 11 or 13 miles.
Well, right. And there was a map I saw that a while ago in the Holocene, when the continental shelf was farther out and a lot of the Channel Islands were joined together, there were actually the distance was reduced to about 3 or 4 miles. And
which is the distance to Anacapa. Why aren't they there?
I don't know. You know what?
Get a doctoral student on that, would you?
I doubt I'd be able to get funding for that particular question, but I appreciate your curiosity. It's funny, folks who aren't in the business of bird science, they ask the best questions, but they're always the ones that we just can't answer.
Yeah, but I am so excited for you. For those of you that don't know, Santa Cruz Island is one of the eight Channel Islands. I don't remember. And it's a national park. Not all the islands are part of the national park.
That's right.
And then you've got the Santa Barbara Channel there, which is just filled with marine mammals, humpbacks and grays and orcas and dolphins. And
it's one of these national parks that many Americans probably have never heard of, and they just don't realize how amazing it is.
And a few miles away from a city of 12 million people.
That's right. That's right.
It is. I mean, we used to go out there and be alone.
Yeah.
We'd go out there to do some research or do some studying. I did a lot of scuba diving off of Anacapa and Santa Cruz.
Nice.
And goodness gracious, I am so excited for you that you were there, because I think it's one of the really, really poorly known treasures of this country.
Yeah.
I mean, we're blessed with a lot of treasures, no doubt about it. Absolutely. And we'll send this clip to Island Packers, because I've been using Island Packers for 50 years.
Good.
But they're great, right?
Yeah.
You go into Ventura Harbor, the harbor's stunning.
Yeah.
You go into the harbor and you catch the boat, and it's a beautiful trip out. You go past the breakwater, and the sea lions are on the buoys, and
we saw a nice tail of a humpback on the way.
Yeah, you get some humpbacks, and you get some seals, and you get some orcas if you're lucky. And my son and I have gone out on our jet skis, and we have been in the middle of a pod of over 2,000 dolphins.
Oh my gosh!
And then when you get to the island, when you get to Santa Cruz, you do feel like you've gone back in time.
You have. Absolutely.
It's got a little Jurassic Park feel to it.
It definitely does.
You're walking in.
It's a huge island too, and I mean we just hiked a small portion of it, but gosh, you can imagine.
Did you go to the left or the right?
Well, we went to, what was it called? Potato Harbor or something?
Okay.
Potato Point or something.
Okay.
And yeah, it was, I guess that's to the right as you're approaching the island.
So that's part of the conservancy part.
Yeah.
When you go,
Yeah. Anyway, it's a fantastic.
Well, for those of you who are watching, if you're in LA, or if you're visiting LA and you love nature and you love wildlife and you love beauty, man, you have got to take, and it's an easy day trip.
That's right.
You pick up the boat at what, 8 in the morning or something, and you're home at 4.
Exactly.
Did you get down to the cave?
I don't think we went to the cave.
So at the far end, on the right-hand side, on the far end is I believe, the largest sea level water cave in the world.
Oh yeah, right.
The big boat that took you out actually can go inside that.
Wow, that's incredible.
And we used to take our jet skis in there and, and
Oh my gosh,
we'd
that's
go, my
crazy.
daughter was a long distance water skier and she'd water ski all the way out there and we'd go.
Jeez,
But
really?
anyway,
She'd go all the way out? That's
oh yeah,
incredible.
she'd go all the way out.
That's incredible.
Oh
Wow,
yeah. Well, she was a horseback rider and she was tremendously strong
my
and she
gosh,
didn't like to fall. So we'd
that's
load her
impressive.
up at the harbor and we'd run out to the island. And the only way I could get her off the ski was to stop the boat.
That's
And then
impressive.
she had to drop.
That's crazy.
But yeah, what a thrill for you to have been able to done that and to
Well, I
see the
got to
island.
fulfill my rule is I don't like to publish on something, a bird, before I've actually seen it in the wild. And the timing was good, I would say.
Well, that is fantastic. All right, so let's wrap up with this. Unless there's something else you want to bring up, I'm going to bring up your bike trip.
No, I'm good.
Okay, so in 2020, COVID hit, and that was a life changer for a lot of us. I myself am a COVID birder, an accidental birder, if you would, starting that first spring of COVID. But you took a different approach. You took a bike trip across the country. You slapped a Black Lives Matter sign on your bike, which I was kidding with Drew Lannon the other day. You might have just put a target on your bike
Well,
in that time and day. You were one of the inspirations for Black Birder Week, and you have a book coming out soon, which you told me was tentatively titled American Journey, Birds, Hope, and Survival on a Bicycle Across America.
that's right.
Am I
That's
close?
right.
Okay. So tell us, what morning did you wake up and say, I know what I'll do? I'll jump on a bike, ride a couple thousand miles, throw a Black Lives Matter sign on the bike, and see what happens. Because that seems like the genius of a Harvard-educated man right there.
Well, I'm not sure you'd call it genius. You might call it tomfoolery, but it was something I had been thinking about for a while. I had done a little bit of bike touring in college, and I just knew it was a great way to see a place, great way to get out of the house. And honestly, I hadn't really done much bike camping since my college days. But I had always had this idea in the back of my mind, wouldn't it be great to go across country? And, when COVID came and the whole world changed and all of our schedules changed, it just seemed like this is the time right now. And, I'm so glad I did it. I started from Plum Island, Massachusetts on the East Coast and made my way over the next 11 weeks to Sunset Beach, Oregon, and met a lot of cool people along the way, saw a lot of great birds, had a few rough spots, as you can imagine, especially with the Black Lives Matter sign on my bicycle. But, that was kind of like a Rorschach's test in some ways. But honestly, I would say 99% of the reactions were positive and horns honking and all that stuff. And, it was just a great experience. It was a great way I often wonder, as we were talking about at the beginning of the show, where is this courage, this independence, this kind of comfort with failure come from? And I'm just thankful that whatever it was that allowed me to sort of feel safe in the outdoors has stuck with me, because it's a really wonderful experience. These days, of course, with cell phones and we're in constant contact. And in fact, a bunch of colleagues and my wife were tracing me on their computer screens as I went west. But it was just so great being out there in the real world, rubbing shoulders with people that were very different from me, seeing landscapes, particularly throughout the Midwest and the Dakotas, that were just alien to me, and just learning a bit more about our country. It's an amazing place.
So did your view of Americans change over the course of the trip?
I am, like many of us on the East Coast, living in this ridiculous bubble. Uh, you know, um, so many ways in which East Coast differs from uh, middle part of the country. This whole socioeconomic issues, wealth, all that stuff. Um, I think I s- I won't say confirmed. I did see it really just drove home some of the stark differences, but I should say also drove home even more forcefully many of the similarities. One of the stark differences is that a lot of communities out there do not have a lot of diversity in them. For whatever reason, many Americans might not have friends of a different ethnic background, friends of a different color. It's not through any fault or any, shunning one group or another at all. It's simply a history of diffusion and geography. And here we are in this Midwestern town that, it might have 1,000 people in it. It's on the brink of collapse. And the patrons at the bar are all coal mining families. Honestly, I just had this sense that we Americans are all trying to survive. We're struggling to survive in many ways, some more pressingly than others. And, it's through no fault of our own that we've grown up with a particular set of values. I mean, we're all like sponges, basically absorbing what our parents and our surroundings are telling us. So, coming together in that way as adults, we sometimes see clashes, but I think I got a better sense of why it is that, some folks think the way they do about alternative energy, about Black Lives Matter. Maybe I'm being a apologist or a pacifist, but I was able to see a little bit more about to understand people's values a bit better, and I think that was hugely valuable.
I think that's fantastic. So before I let you go, and I don't want to let you go actually, so that I'm clear, but you shared with me a story about the Dakotas and American avocet. Can right?
That's right.
Can you please share that with the audience? Because I thought that was a fantastic story.
It's not.
This is from Scott's bike trip.
That's right. It's not so much a story, but just an image, an impression. I was cycling through central South Dakota, and I was emailing with my friend John Fitzpatrick, the former director of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And he said, "You're right in the middle of the potholes." And, I was like, I had heard of this habitat called the potholes, but I certainly didn't realize I was in the middle of it. And, it's this amazing habitat pressured with all kinds of agriculture, soybeans and corn all around it. It's a wonder that some of these ponds and marshes just in the middle of nowhere have survived the onslaught of agriculture. But one evening, as I was heading west through South Dakota, I just had this really nice view of a lone avocet. It was, the sun was setting, and for me, it's not about the rarity of a species or how hard it was to see it. It's all about the bird in its environment and how is it connecting with the bigger picture. And this avocet just made such an impression because it was, you know, just settling down for the evening. And it was just, it's a gorgeous bird, gorgeous golden tint on it, golden light from the sun. So it was just a very vivid impression. And it's those sorts of things that I take with me on those sorts of trips.
I think that's the magic of what we do is, these I call them sunset moments, right? Where
Yeah,
you're just
that's
in
right.
awe. It's not that there's not going to be another one in 24
That's right.
hours, but
That's
that
right.
doesn't make it any less spectacular.
Yeah.
Scott, you've mentioned a couple of times John Fitzpatrick in the show. For those of you that don't know John, he did run Cornell's Lab of Ornithology for 29 years. He's not a very accomplished man, although he has discovered 7 different birds in his lifetime. All of them I believe all of them in Peru, at least 6 of the 7 in Peru. And it's a small thing for birders, but he oversaw the development of eBird and Merlin. John is a guest in my book, Scott, to your point, and he's going to be a guest on the show. So
That's
I'm looking
great.
forward to, because you've mentioned him a couple of times with a bit of reverence
And he's actually a co-author on our paper on the scrub jays too, which we're really
and
excited
just to be clear, because my wife says my sarcasm doesn't always come through, John is an extraordinarily accomplished man.
Yeah,
just
no,
just so
yeah.
somebody doesn't call and say, "Hey, this
Right,
guy
right, right.
Harris, with his 3 podcast
Exactly.
viewers, is running you down," because that's not the case. I'm impressed
That's
as
it.
hell with John as I am with Scott. Scott, you know what? As you know, the podcast is relatively new, and so it's evolving and growing. So my last question to you is and it'll be the first time I ask this of a guest, but I plan on asking it every time in the future. For those who have gained an interest over the last hour in natural history and natural history museums, what's the first book they should read?
Oh wow. Whew, that's a tough one. I'll have to think about this. Let's see here. There's a book that a friend of mine wrote. He's this Brazilian Swedish scientist named Alex Antonelli. And his book, which came out just a few years ago, is called Hidden Universe: Adventures in Biodiversity. And that's the book I would recommend. He's starting a foundation to protect the Atlantic rainforest in Brazil. And it's a really neat perspective on biodiversity from a cutting edge scientist who thinks about habitats and how animals evolve, mountain ranges. That's what I would recommend.
Okay. Thank you very much. We'll be sure to highlight that on the show. We'll throw up a graphic of the book and stuff so people could find it.
Absolutely.
Anything else that you want to mention? You want to tell us when your book's coming out, or
Oh gosh,
anything you want to let the guests know?
Well, look for the book. Hopefully it'll be out sometime late 2026, and I'm still writing, so it's a work in progress. It's going to be a fun exploration of all things birdie and peoply and landscapey in the United States. So.
Well, thank you. And Dr. Scott V. Edwards, thank you so much for joining us today. I've another fascinating conversation. I look forward to many more.
Thank you, Scott. Absolutely. We got to meet. We got to meet in person one of these days.
Yeah, that I am very much looking forward to. I might have jumped on a plane if I'd known you were heading out to Santa Cruz. That would have been tempting. A great place to meet, right? A boat ride out there.
That's right. That's right.
For those of you, if you enjoyed the show, man, share it with somebody, because the more viewers we get, the better it is for the show, and allows us to keep great guests like Scott coming in. And if you're watching, I'll follow this up with field notes. And Scott, I don't know if you're aware of this, but following each guest, I do about a 5 or 7 minute segment on some sort of bird or park or animal, a single thing that's gathered my attention. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I now do. In your honor, I'm going to do island scrub jay.
Oh, good.
So the field notes for the next one will be island scrub jay. Again, Scott, thank you so much. And for all of you that took the time to watch and listen to Scott, stay healthy and stay curious. And I'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Hello, and welcome to this edition of Field Notes. For those of you that don't know, Field Notes is something that we add at the end of every one of our podcasts, where I focus on one thing, one animal, one bird, one park, one environmental issue, and just share what I consider some interesting facts and stories about that. And so today we are going to talk about the island scrub jay, which was not my intention, but we just finished up a great podcast with Scott Edwards of Harvard University, and Scott had some stories about scrub jays, and let's just talk about some scrub jays. So we're going to do that. Let me give you a little background information first. The Channel Islands are located in Southern California. There are 8 of them, and the Channel Islands are known by some as North America's Galapagos, which is exciting for me because my wife Randy and I are going to the real Galapagos next September. We're taking a National Geographic expedition. We took one a couple months ago up in Alaska and found it to be absolutely remarkable. So different from a cruise, if you will. These are really expeditions. And so we're looking forward to that. But let's focus on these islands. Of the 8, 5 of them make up Channel Islands National Park. Now, for those of you who don't know, Channel Islands National Park is a stunning, stunning park and one of the least visited in the country. It's amazing to me that more people don't go, but they don't. And it's just a few miles off the coast of Southern California. 12 million people live in LA. You think the parks would be swamped, but they're not. The 5 that make up the national park are Anacapa, Santa Barbara, San Miguel, Santa Rosa, and the one we'll focus most of our attention on today, Santa Cruz Island. Santa Cruz is bigger than the other 5 combined. It is 3/4 owned by the Nature Conservancy and 1/4 owned by the National Park Service. We're going to talk about a couple of endemic species today. If you're not sure what endemic is, that is a native animal and restricted to a certain place. I guess in one way, we're all endemic, where we pretty much restricted to Earth, but they're talking more specific. And in this case, we'll be talking about the islands. Now, one of these endemic animals is the island fox, which can be found on 6 of the 8 islands: San Miguel, San Nicolas, Santa Catalina, San Clemente, Santa Rosa, and Santa Cruz. Each of those 6 is a subspecies. They don't move around between islands, and they have evolved slightly differently. So overall, the island fox is endemic, and yet on each of the islands, we have a subspecies. In addition to that, on the islands endemic, There are 3 other mammals, 3 reptiles and amphibians, and 1 moth. There is only 1 endemic bird on the islands, and that is on Santa Cruz, and that is actually what we're going to focus on. And as I mentioned, Scott Edwards from Harvard is doing some research on the island scrub jay, which is what we're going to be talking about. And he just visited last week, went out on Island Packers and took a trip out there. Island Packers is a group that transports you generally from Ventura Harbor out to some of the islands, including Santa Cruz. I have been taking Island Packer trips for more than 50 years. I grew up in Southern California when I studied marine biology, started going out there in the early 70s. Island Packers, I believe, was founded in 1968. They've always done a great job. They've been very safe. They're on time. They're good. They're clean. They're fun. They've got some pretty good chow on board. Back in the 70s, when I was out in Southern California, I was on the board of directors of the Friends of Channel Islands National Park. Embarrassingly, I don't even know if the organization is still there, but it developed or furthered my relationship with those islands. The island scrub jay in particular is the only bird that is endemic to the islands, and it is only found on Santa Cruz Island, which is a little bit surprising because only about 3 hours away, tip to tip, 3 miles away, tip to tip is Anacapa Island, and yet no island scrub jay has ever been found there, which doesn't make sense to me because clearly they could fly 3 miles, but they haven't. And I actually asked Scott Edwards about that, and maybe he'll get a chance to look into it and come up with some answers. And if he does, I will be coming back and sharing those with you. The island scrub jay is the largest jay in North America, which is surprising because a lot of times animals like the island fox, for example, is much, much smaller than their mainland cousin. But for whatever reason, the island scrub jay has evolved into the largest in North America. Has a deep blue head, deep blue wings and tail, kind of a grayish back and underparts. It's really a neat contrast. It's beautiful. Habitat for that bird, coastal sage scrub, chaparral, oak woodlands, pretty much the island. You can find them right along the beach. When you take Island Packers over there, you dock on a long dock, which is just beautiful. You walk up to the island, and it looks like you've been transported somewhere exotic, and you can find those scrub jays right there. And the island foxes can be found there as well. The island scrub jays are omnivores, and like most corvids, and they are a corvid, they are opportunists. So they will kind of eat whatever's around. They'll eat small animals. They'll eat vegetation. They'll eat stuff that the guests leave, whatever it might be. They store acorns, so they're very good for the environment. They help spread different plants around the island and try to keep those healthy. They breed in the spring. They have a clutch of 3 to 5 eggs. It's estimated there's a little over 2,000 of them spread out over the island. It is also thought that they diverged from the California scrub jay thousands of years ago, but that has not been confirmed yet, but something that they are considering, scientists that are studying those. Some of the differences between those two is the island scrub jay is larger, it's more brightly colored, and it has a stronger, stouter bill. All of those things are worth exploring, and maybe Scott Edwards will be doing that. If you get a chance, if you live in Southern California or you're visiting Southern California and you love nature, and I'm guessing you do or you wouldn't be listening to this, you got to stop and take a peek. Take a trip out there, call Island Packers, take a trip across the water. That alone is worth it because you'll see marine mammals from the moment you board the ship in Ventura Harbor. There will be sea lions out there. And then when you get into the Santa Barbara Channel, you could see humpbacks and grays and orcas and sea lions and dolphins, thousands sometimes. It is a remarkable trip, and it's a tremendous amount of fun. And if you're a birder and you keep lists and you want to check off a lifer, unless you've been to Santa Cruz Island, man, that's the only place you're going to get it. So I hope you have a great time. I hope you tune into the next Field Notes. Be safe and stay curious.